/ author conversation, but also just like a hang. Hey, girl, you know? We're just going to really just talk to one another and hear how beautiful and wonderful your work has been, and this debut. I still cannot believe this is your debut.
It is my debut.
This is her first book.
Yeah. Well, there's one in a drawer that will never see the light of day. But this is the first book I have published. Yes.
Congratulations. How do you feel?
You know, it's surreal because for me, it's not about me. Mm-hmm. It's about Alabama and uplifting and empowering and showing the beauty of the place where my family just loves. So I feel like even the first fiction, I said, this is for Alabama.
Yes. There's so much ancestral memory in the book, and it has such a unique feeling of longing and love and just fortitude. I just felt that in all the characters, especially Alice, like her fortitude. And I thought it would be great to introduce, I hope folks have read the book, but if you haven't, we're going to get a special treat because you're going to read for us from the beginning, right?
Yes.
From memory.
So, that was supposed to be a surprise. So, just so y'all know, the reason I do it from memory is because if you know me or if you knew my people, I come from a line of storytellers. I mean, the Tuesday ladies are here. How many stories did we tell right in your shop? So for those of you who've read the book, the Tuesday ladies came out tonight. But so much of the storytelling that I do is from my ear, and so that's how I wrote the book. So when I envisioned the opening scene, I envisioned Major and like everybody sitting around sort of after a barbecue, and it's like the closest family and friends, and everybody's like not quite ready to clean up, but they're satisfied. It's a beautiful starry night, and the moon is out. And so Major says, you know, Alice, why don't you tell us a story of how you came to New Jessup? And she looks around, she sort of huffs, she says, you know, don't nobody want to hear that old story. And then I envisioned Raymond coming up and saying, now, Alice, you know ain't nobody leaving, so you go ahead and tell us the story. So y'all want to hear a story? All right. So as Alice, she would say, the moon rises and sets, stitching eternity together, night by night. Love's spun thread binds family when even years or the blue skies stand between one and another's touch. Generations travel the same footprints, reach hands to the same climbing branches, and warm the same brown skin under the Alabama sun. Maybe family brings to mind only love, marital relations, and it's easy to understand that way of thinking. But love by my hands tethers generations to generations, as well as kin by skin. In this place where all in me and of me can thrive. But even the strongest thread will snap with constant tension and no slack. The heavens overflow with memories lost. So, as life requires, I hold taut and I give. In some ways, my people know, if in some they never will. But in all ways, my moon rises and sets for family. So, in eternity, the time had come for me to leave the home where I was born. The sun was setting, and the half-balled red sweet gum around the fields announced November, just a few days coming. But 1957 was still October old when my landlord found himself face down on the ground for trying to drag me behind him to the tool shed. I was the last to leave the home house in Rensselaer. Daddy had passed a couple weeks before, and I had settled him next to Mama, though his burial left me scrambling for the rent. My sister Rosie was living in Chicago with a nice family doing hair, and my need to keep a roof over my head had mellowed my worry to wonder about when her next letter would arrive. There was plenty of gleaning left to make November's payment, and then I'd scratch around for whatever came available to buy myself some time. I had never planned or wanted to leave Alabama, but with old man Todd shouting curses at my back, his face split open, gushing sweet gum red, my plans to stay began to fade. After a night at the neighbor's and an hours-long walk with the dawn, I arrived at the bus station with just my thrown-together knapsack. The man behind the counter assured me that my little money would carry me to Birmingham, not Nashville or Louisville or Cleveland, let alone Chicago. Birmingham, he said, and no further. In the hours that I waited on the bus to depart, my world came undone piece by piece. Unable to get to a place I never wanted to go, with ticket in hand to a place I knew not a single soul, first, the landscape flattened. Direction was next, north, south, east, west, all headed towards the unfamiliar, then finally color, till everything faded to black and white. I rode the bus into this flat, directionless, colorless world till it shushed to a stop in my new home. Not that I knew it at the time. No, my ticket read Birmingham, and all I knew was that we had stopped somewhere between nowhere in particular and the big city. We'd gone 100 country miles, or maybe 10, stopped once, twice, 4 times, I don't know. I was huddled against the window, watching the world blur by, while the man seated next to me kept up one-sided conversation about returning north after visiting with his wife and children down country. Somewhere along the way, he started worrying me about the brown paper bag in my lap and the chicken grease soaking through to my dress, but that oily stain hardly ruined anything. The gray threads had known color when I first sewed it, red plaid, but that stain just turned light gray to ash and ash gray to black, so somewhere near Needham, I offered him the chicken. He took it and finally left me alone. We shushed to a stop and the bus emptied, some getting off, hugging loved ones hello, some taking luggage from the belly of the bus, and most everybody stretching, smiling, and laughing underneath the blue sky day. The stops were all the same to me, so I stayed in the window with my head against the glass, feeling the sun's warmth against my cheek. And that's when a red-heeled shoe clicked its way up the sidewalk. 2 of them, if I'm honest, though it wasn't so much the shoes that caught my eye, but the bronze stocking legs inside them. They continued up the way towards a sidewalk cafe before disappearing through the front door. My eyes traveled from that cafe to the sidewalk to the row of brick-front shops lining a wide avenue. The sun gleamed from the white tile at the bus depot, and a polished chrome dog leapt over the door. But a couple folks, one like me, the other nothing like me, looked around unsure what we were seeing. When the man seated next to me came back smelling of cigarettes and shoe polish, he urged me off the bus with a dime from his own pocket. "Miss, this here's a good place to stretch your legs. Why don't you go on inside and get yourself a Coca-Cola?" Before stepping foot to pavement, I hovered in the doorway of that bus. To the left and the right, the avenue, the sidewalk, the storefronts, all extended to the horizon in either direction. But reaching the front door of the depot, the colored entrance was nowhere in sight. To my right, a shoeshine man chewed a toothpick while he inspected the shoe and the polish in his hands from every angle. Behind me, from the bus window, the man urged me through the door. Only the last thing I needed was to be arrested just for going through the front to buy a Coke. "Help you, miss?" asked that shoeshine man. Till those words eased from his mouth, he'd done his level best to ignore me. With the weather-beaten hand-me-downs on my feet, it was no wonder why. "I'm looking for the colored entrance, please," I said to the pavement, not wanting to be pegged ignorant of city ways and where they hid the Negro doorways. "You won't find one of them here," he said. "Just walk in." "I'm looking for the colored entrance, please," I insisted. He seemed an unusual man, perhaps a prankster of some sort, with the long limbs, triangular head, and bulging eyes of a chameleon. Just the sort to make trouble for folks and dart away. "We ain't got one of them, 'cause ain't nothing but Negroes in this town. Look around and see if you see any white folks other than these sorry few from the buses." He smirked and returned his attention to the shoe in his hand, satisfied he knew the lay of the land. A dark, Brown man inside sold bus tickets and answered questions while two soldiers in Army-issue khaki rushed past me, one with the deep mulberry skin of the ready harvest and the other, my same sun-gold cinnamon with dark freckles on his cheeks, who placed a hand to his peaked cap. A light-skinned woman with a wild mane of bottle red hair rushed into a yellow cab driven by a portly man of pecan complexion. He sped past an ebony police officer in white gloves holding palms up, meaning stop. Across the street, a bib-overalled man with paint on it was talking to another bib-overalled man, Cocoa Brown. And the family by the drink machine, well, the mama, she was high yellow, but the daddy was a rich, deep brown to match some good, peaty soil. One child favored him, one her, and one fell to a brown somewhere in the middle, and that was just within those few feet of me at the depot. Up and down the avenue, Negroes of every shade came together like the dusk in a fall forest. I should have been glad, relieved to find such a start of my journey, but my knees gave out and I sank onto the bench next to the shoeshine man. I buried my face in my hands and sobbed. Ain't our folks' usual reaction when they first arrive in New Jessup, he said, patting my shoulder with the light taps of a man unaccustomed to comforting people. I stopped crying in time to wave the bus off, too exhausted to shed another drop. Is there a church house nearby? I asked. Pastor and Mrs. Brown would take right good care of you up at Morning Star Baptist, he said, and with walking directions, he sent me on my way. When I got up the sidewalk a little bit, he called out. When I turned, he spoke to the stain on my dress and the marks on my arm that weariness had me forgetting to hide. But miss, if you're looking for white folks, and I don't imagine that you would be, but say you are, well, you'd have to get all the way to the other side of the woods to find a single one. And I'll stop there.
I feel like I'm just speechless. Like I was expecting you to read, but that was a beautiful performance. You are so spellbinding. That was beautiful. That was just so beautiful. You are Alice. Alice was here in the room with us now.
You know a funny story, though? So my Aunt Clara is my mama's last living sibling. Mm-hmm. Alice is really based on the women in my family. Mm-hmm. So my Aunt Clara, my family all read the book, and my Aunt Clara, we don't have an Alice in our family, but Young is my mom's maiden name. Mm-hmm. So she said, but Alice kin to us somehow, right? And I said, well, Alice is you, but she's fictional. But she said, no, Alice kin to us. It's just like it's settled, right? Like that just is what it is.
I also just love the way you throw us into the story immediately. Like we have this immediate connection with her. We see that not only has she had to leave because of that crazy landlord trying to come up behind her. So she's like on the run, thinking quick in this space of despair, but also longing, right? Like she's longing for home. She wants her sister. She's trying to just find her place. And then she ends up in New Jessup. Yeah. How did you decide to start the book in this very profound way? It feels like not even just a beginning, but this like immediate rush of energy that happens with all the characters.
Well, you know, with Alice, she says from the very beginning she never intended to leave Alabama. Mm-hmm. And, you know, that's, I think when I talk to people outside of Alabama, it's something very difficult for people to understand because we're told this sort of narrative about Black people, particularly in the South, particularly in the Southeast, that we're supposed to have wanted to leave. And so she's in a very vulnerable space. She's lost, I mean, you know, we think about the fact that she's been through this horrific attack with her landlord and she fought him off, but her daddy just passed away 2 weeks before. And so, you know, I feel like when we have these conversations about why people left the South, you know, the narrative of we were going to something better isn't always necessarily the case, or that we wanted to leave wasn't always the case. And so I wanted to show that she really has a tie to the soil. That's why she calls the father, she says he has his skin is deep brown and matched some good, peaty soil.
Yes.
I mean, I don't know how many of y'all are really familiar with like the color that is, but she's calling this man something really beautiful and rich that she's experienced her entire life. And so it was really important to show that she really loved the soil, and just like then having to leave would have been so devastating for her.
So not only are we seeing Alice in this completely new environment, New Jessup is a new town, it's a new beginning for her, but you're also learning about how the town came to be. So you were witnessing it through Alice's eyes, all this newness. Was that always your dream from the beginning, to have this town that was rich in Black solidarity and love and just hope and joy? There's so much joy that also exists in the town. Was that always like how you wanted to move the story?
Yes, because I wanted, I came up hearing the stories. My people are from Demopolis, Alabama, and so I came up hearing stories about how my family in Baptist Hill owned land. Yes. My granddaddy farmed and had chickens, and they hunted and they fished the Tombigbee and the Black Warrior River, right? Like we had things that were part of our community, our churches, our schools. We were really a part of a loving community. Yeah. And so when, now the narrative, thinking back on that time, is, well, what were people doing during the civil rights movement? And the answer is people were living. Yes. People were actually, if you can believe it, people were living. Yeah. And so New Jessup is really based on, first of all, the 1,200 Black towns and settlements we have had in this country since the late 18th century until Freedom, Georgia was founded in 2019. Yeah. So, it's not, but it's also the enclaves that we have that aren't municipalities or sides of town. It's the Howard University, yes, right? Yes. It's our benevolent societies. It's the links. It's our Greek organizations. It's all of these. It's our communities. Yeah. And where we're in community with one another, and how that is so beautiful, but how the narrative has been so forced into this sort of opposite direction, which is really intentional. Yeah. So, yes, it was, I just wanted to tell the story of like the Alabama that my people knew. Mm-hmm. And it's been a real blessing to see how that has then translated into so many different areas, learning about even more areas, and hearing so much from the elders about, this was my story.
Yes, I was so taken by, when I was reading it, I started going down all these rabbit holes of like Googling history facts. And one of the things that I was taken with was this May of 2023 was the 40th anniversary of Brown versus Board of Education. And there's just and then most recently, with everything that's happening with Emmett Till, they're trying to make it a federal holiday. And we think about all of these things as these monumental things, because they are, but actually contextualizing them and putting it in the everyday life, yes. Like thinking about someone, having their everyday job, doing ordinary things, and also that was happening at the same time. I think your book brings light to that. Like, it's not only history, it's someone's lived experience.
Right, because think about what it's going to be in 30, 40 years when people are asking us, what were you doing during the Black Lives Matter movement?
Right, exactly.
And I'm like, I was living. Like, I went to dinner with my friends. I traveled. I wrote a book, right? We lived and we loved and we had experiences and relationships and we tasted food and we went swimming and we did, and so to think about how narrowly our ancestors and elders' history has been sort of boxed in. And then it goes through the generations, where the generations get such a narrower and narrower slice of life. Yeah. Now we do go to our elders, and I've had to tell people, don't ask your people what they were doing during the civil rights movement. If you want to know, ask them what life was like for them at 15. Yeah. Because the stories are going to come out if they want to tell you, but they also want to tell you, your granddaddy wants to tell you how he pulled your grandmama. Yes. Yes. And you could probably learn a thing or two.
Right. We do need
like
that
those old players had game, right?
Yes. Because Raymond had some game. Okay? He really, really did. I was like, this is very interesting. I do want to get into the development of these characters. Who came to you first? And that, I guess that's the first question. And the next part of that is how did you decide to craft a love story? Because it follows us throughout the novel. It is so like center to the book. And so I'm like, what came to you first? Just let us know. Give us all the tea.
So Alice came to me first, but in a sort of roundabout way, because the book really came from a short story idea.
Okay.
And the short story idea was that it was going to be just a black family around a holiday table debating the merits of Brown versus the Board of Education. And so in this scenario, you know what Pop is saying, you know what Dot is saying, you know what Percy and Matthew and Patience and, definitely Percy. You know what they're all going to say. But in this vision that I had, Alice was like serving the turkey. And then, my family, the women in my family, and I feel like this is something very unique to Alabama, they hold things behind a little smile. And so in the vision, Alice was like, they know my mind on it, so I'm not going to jump into this. I'm not interested in debating this. Yeah. And that's exactly when I knew it was her story, because so many of us keep so much behind our smile. And I really, really wanted to explore her. So that's when I knew it was her story, and I knew it was a novel. And, I thought about, with the love story, I've had people say, well, why didn't you just tell Raymond's story? I said, because Raymond's story is the story we always get, but can you imagine, like, if Raymond would have been responsible for, like, picking B up from school, or, like, fixing supper at night? Or if Dr. King had like somehow been responsible for like report cards. It's like we lionize these leaders without thinking about all the support that they had at home. And so that's why it's
and how
Moonrise.
Critical it was, like how vital to their success. How what is the saying? If the man is the head, the woman is the neck. It's just like they were so interconnected in every way.
But I didn't want, because I didn't see Alice as somebody who, even coming into New Jessup as she did, I didn't see her as somebody who needed saving. Alice is all Alabama to me. Like she's gonna make a way.
Right.
But the narrative, like the men in my family, none of them are perfect. Raymond is certainly not perfect. I mean, he did some things in this book that, but they're strong men. They're men who think about family. They're men who want the best for their community. And all that's fine and good, but I didn't see him as her savior. If anything, that's why she's the Moonrise, because she's pulling his tides.
Yeah, I love that. And I think it's also so important to show those distinctions, that she doesn't need saving. They're peers in that way, and that's what even makes their love even greater. It's because they support each other in such a beautiful way. And the scenes, oh my gosh, I really loved during the brainstorm when they first meet, and just like how, like you described the ease of their conversation. It's like they've known each other for a long time, but he also is like clever, and they're just like the banter. You have a really wonderful way with dialogue, and now as we see, you clearly have a actress in you too, honey. You just like so. Tell me how you went about like just crafting the dialogue for all the characters, but that scene in particular was like, I feel like I'm watching their romance build.
Well, keep in mind, Papa's in the back seat grousing, remember?
Yes.
But that's a crucial part of that scene, because part of the reason that they enjoy each other so much is because they're sort of trading eyes, because Pop is grousing about young people these days, and he's in the back, and he's also teasing Raymond about the car. Because Pop has this beautiful Cadillac, and Raymond's got this Frankenstein car with a Studebaker nameplate, right? And so they're riding in Raymond's car, and Pop's trying to like throw a little shade. And so in that sort of scenario, it just felt really natural for Alice and Raymond to for her to like take his side and be like, but also understand this old man in the back is probably doing something. Because remember at the end, he says, "See, Alice, I ain't raised no man for Pinckney Ave now."
right.
But, so he's sort of in on it too. But that just sort of the dynamic of showing the love sort of very initially between Raymond and Alice,
Yeah.
but also seeing how Pop and the elders, the town elders, really embraced her.
Yeah.
So that was just, I love that scene. I love all the scenes.
Yeah,
I
I
have
mean,
to say.
they're also well done. There's another scene when the young girls the sisters are climbing the tree.
Yes.
And so the two sisters, they're climbing the tree, and then Alice gets to one point, and she gets scared.
Yes, she gets
and her
scared.
sister's able to walk her down. But the thing that really stood out for me is when the mother is scolding them, she is talking about how are you going to try to intentionally kill
Yeah.
yourself in a tree when
Yeah.
there's so many things that can kill you in a tree. So she's alluding to
Yeah.
lynching. But the young girls, they're like 5 and 6,
5 and
right?
6.
And so when I was taking my notes, I was just like, wow, like this idea of something as innocent as climbing a tree can suddenly be turned into this other very just like horrific moment, right? It goes from climbing to tree to you are intentionally risking your life where other things can take your life too, if I'm making sense, you know what I
No,
mean?
yeah, and I think that's why remember their daddy yanks that sapling out of the ground. Like
yes.
he's angry. To
Yes.
yank a sapling out of the forest floor
Yes.
takes strength.
Yes.
And he's angry, and as she says, as soon as my toe kissed the earth, my daddy was
there.
on me.
Yes.
And he snatched her up and whooped her with
Yeah.
that sapling,
Yeah.
and then Rosie's tipping away, right? And so you see all of this, but
But it's also the love.
it's also
right?
love. And
Yeah.
there's so much nuance in our relationships, in Black relationships, that is very difficult to put on the page.
But
And
how did you do it? You do it in such a profound way. Like, were you studying your family? Were you looking at other archetypes in books? Because you find that in between very beautifully.
it's all of it. It's my family, it's the elders. Elders are great to sit around and talk about that whooping they got back in 1945, right? Like, they're really great to talk about that. So some of these anecdotes, not that one in particular, but some of the pieces in the book are, things that are family anecdotes that I sort of placed in there. But, so when you have a grown man, whooping a child with a sapling, it seems at first like a very brutal thing to do. She's already scared to death, coming down out the tree, and her toe kisses the earth, and he whoops her. But then her mama's going on all the ways that this world's going to try to kill you in a tree for you to be up here doing the world's work for it. First of all, every Black mama in America knows something talking about the world, right? So, but it's just this idea that, when we are disciplining our children, when we're lecturing our children, they very much love those girls. Yeah. And they, from that love in that period, there is fear to love. And I think love in general, when you do it right, you are afraid. Yeah. But to think about the love for a child that you bring into this world, that then the world you have to unhand and let into the world. They let the girls go for 2 minutes, and all of a sudden they're in a tree. That's love, and it's fear, and it's all of it. And I feel that, and so I wanted to make sure that I showed all of that on the page.
Another thing that really struck me was the use of color in the introduction, the first chapter you just read, the red heels. And you're wearing red today, so it's so fitting. You look so beautiful. But the way that you describe skin tone, like acorn, like the deep soil, and it's because it's really easy to be, light skin, dark skin, but you show the variety and the texture, just the richness of Black identity, and that carries throughout the book again. It's not just like that one chapter. It shows up again and again in your descriptions. Can you talk about the use of color and why that was so important for you to just make these very vivid moments?
Well, so remember at the beginning when she says the world faded to black and white. And so I feel like that's sort of the low point of her vulnerability. Like that's the very, very low point, the flat point. I can't get to Chicago. I ain't got no money in my pocket to get to anywhere except Birmingham. I don't know anybody in Birmingham. I'm on this bus. This man's bothering me for this chicken. I don't know. She's really at a low point. And so the world fades to black and white, which was sort of intentional because I feel like when we're having these conversations that lack nuance about race in America and the year of our Lord 2023, it gets down to black and white.
Right.
Right? and there's
Yes.
so much color. So much color. And so she's riding the bus, and I don't know how many of y'all are familiar with a country mile, but a country mile could be a mile, it could be 10 miles. And so she's sort of in this foggy space, and the first thing that snaps her back is noticing those red shoes and the bronze legs.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
And so she's saying, okay, there's something about this place, and I don't know what it is, but there's something about this place that catches my eye.
Yeah.
And then she sees the woman go through the front door, and then she sees, the white tile, and she sees the silver dog, and she sees all these things coming in to view, to focus. And then the color, by the time she finishes describing all the colors of skin, it's the dusk in the fall forest. And if you think about how nuanced, how many different colors you can see in a fall forest. So she's really starting to experience variation in color. And then throughout the book, you'll notice she starts talking not about purple, but eggplant.
Yeah.
And she starts talking about color in much more sophisticated ways because she's growing.
Yes.
And so, I wanted to show her growth and sort of how she's able to grow in New Jessup.
Yeah, so many times in literature when you hear any mention of the forest, it's always like a metaphor for the mind. And so that's what brought me, I was reading, I was like, okay, is this supposed to be like her evolution, how she's like embarking on this new passage of her life? It just was so rich. There's such a lushness to the language. I also want to talk, I always love reading like the dedication and the acknowledgments of each book. And you have a line from Beloved, which is one of my favorite books. So can you tell us about that? We can even read it. Would you like to read it for the folks?
Sure. So the book is dedicated to my mama and in her place among the stars. And the dedication is, let me go here. It's from Beloved, and it's the Baby Suggs sermon. In this here place we flesh that weeps, laughs, flesh that dances on bare feet and grass. Love it hard. And so that was really important for me to put in there because that first two paragraphs when Alice is telling everybody, I'm doing this all for y'all. Like Robert Jones Jr., he calls that the benediction.
Oh, yes.
So,
yes.
But she's saying, listen, I'm finna tell y'all a story. And some things you know and some things you'll never know, but just know that I did this all for you. She's saying, I love New Jessup. I love y'all hard. And so this is the book. This is Alice's story of doing just that.
It's so incredible. I think I'm also taken by your backstory before becoming this incredible debut. I was going to say writer. You're also a lawyer, right?
Recovering lawyer.
Yeah, recovering lawyer. Oh, yes. But you understand policy. You understand the law, right? So how did that show up as you were writing historical fiction? Like, how did you make sure everything was accurate and it was told in a way that could also hold that nuance, but also hold the truth of what really happened to people during this time period, especially during the civil rights movement?
A lot of the research that I did was not based in the law. I mean, there's this great book called Bloody Lowndes by Hassan Jeffries, Hakeem is his brother, Hassan Jeffries, and it's about Lowndes County, Alabama, and it showed this really sort of micro political movement that the people were engaged in, but it was they started because they wanted better schools for their children, but they didn't want integration. They wanted their school to be better. So then in 1964, with the Democratic Convention and everything that happened there, folks in Mississippi decided we're going to go to the baddest place in the South where the SCLC and the NAACP and nobody will touch. And so Lowndes County, Alabama, had actually been nicknamed Bloody Lowndes. And so Stokely Carmichael's like, we going there.
Oh, wow.
And so when he arrived, he found all these people who had created these benevolent societies in their homes. And it was for the purpose of taking care of the elderly and infirm in one place, or advocating for schools in another place, or agitating for the vote in another place. And so that was really like texts like that and talking to my elders and ancestors, or my elders. Well, I do talk to my ancestors sometimes, but my elders definitely about their real lived experience was like the baseline. So then when you go in, you talk to the elders and they're like, well, we would have done this and whatever. And my legal brain is like, all right, slow down. Like, because I think the mistake is that people really believe when I come sort of north of the Mason-Dixon, they think, oh, well, people in Alabama didn't know better. And it's really important for me, for folks to recognize.
Why do you think that is?
I don't know. But what I do know is that Alabama and the southern states birthed the civil rights movement. Yeah. And I think we really need to acknowledge that.
Yeah, we can clap to that.
These were folks who wanted better on their soil. Yeah. And so I think there's a lot of narrative about everything was better in the North. And, of course, with the Great Migration and the promises, I will say, of better jobs, better pay and all this stuff, better living conditions, which a lot of that didn't end up being true. But it really depends on who controls the narrative.
Right.
So I say all that to say, people really had a great understanding of how the resources were being diverted, what the vote actually meant. But when you talk to folks, sometimes I needed my legal brain to sort of sort through and sift through stories and figure out strategies. And, particularly because some of our elders are getting up in their 90s and, close to 100. Miss Hazel in Montgomery. Shout out to Miss Hazel, just turned 100 the other day. Wow. So it's important to be able to fill in those gaps, and I was able to use my sort of legal training to do that.
Yeah, as I was reading again, I tend to write in the margins and do a lot of Googling as I'm reading things. And I feel like your book is in conversation with so many. And I ended up rereading passages from, The Souls of Black Folks, just so many things to kind of remind myself of this time period and why the work that you're doing right now is so essential to also keeping the contemporary Alabama alive, right? There's so many movements that are currently happening that need this history and this acknowledgement.
Absolutely.
Where do you think your work sits when it comes to thinking about a new Alabama and the things that need to happen to acknowledge the past? Especially with the museums there's just so much stuff that's happening currently.
The thing is that there is a real movement to acknowledge the past. There are several organizations like the Alabama African American Civil Rights Heritage Sites Consortium has done a lot to update old churches and old historical sites that were integral to the civil rights movement, whether they're doctors' offices, churches, different spaces. There is a movement to do that, and obviously that the people are still doing that and will continue to do that work. The things that we're losing, like Hobson City, Alabama, is the oldest municipality, oldest black city in Alabama. In 3 weeks, it will turn 124 years old. Oh, wow. And that's something to have achieved that. Yeah. Hobson City, Alabama was a major stop on the Chitlin Circuit. And so when we're talking about preserving our history is more than trial and tribulation and trauma. Yeah. Our history is the fact that we had, I gave a speech there last year, and I was like, I know what y'all have had going on here, but I heard Sam Cooke came through here, and you hear the elders, yeah. I said, Johnny Taylor, yeah. Make it real excited. You say James Brown, and they start hooping, right? And so it's that's our history too. Right. And by focusing on, they're building the National Park Service is building in Anniston, which was a site of one of the Freedom Riders buses was bombed. So they're building a memorial to that. But we also need to build memorials to commemorate the fact that this was a major stop on the Chitlin Circuit. Yeah. For me, I've been trying to get a Chitlin Circuit literary society going because I want us
what does that look like? How do we enroll?
Or and I'm going to put this out there, a Chitlin Circuit concert series.
Okay.
You know what I'm saying? Because our history is so rich in music and culture. Yep. And by bringing all that into the book, I want us to remember how dynamic and explosive and beautiful we are.
And it pulls away from this idea that like there's one type of way to, when you're talking about civil rights, you can only talk about, like you said, like the traumatic things. You can actually talk about the Chitlin Circuit too, and how you folks, you know, did voter registration or did whatever the case may be. Like all these things were happening simultaneously. It's not one or the other.
Yeah, I mean, you think about, because these people had to eat, right? And so think about all the meals that they would have eaten. My auntie was telling me the other day, I was walking in Montgomery, and she said, now see over here, because there are a bunch of, you know, the foundation for the building, the houses will be gone, but the steps and like the bricks will be there.
Yeah.
And these are all places that were on the march from Selma to Montgomery.
Right.
So these are like on a historic trail. And we're walking by, the houses are all demolished. She said, over there, that used to be an old juke joint. And I was like, how would you know about that juke joint? And she said, how you think I knew about that juke joint? And so, you know, or they talk about going to the Classic, you know, the football games between the HBCUs.
Yes, of course.
And so one day we were walking, and she was imitating the drum major doing the back bend. I said, don't hurt yourself. She said, we be out there in furs, and we just be sharp. But that's part of our history.
Yes,
these classic football games are not from the last 10 decades.
Right.
So, you know, all of that is our community.
Yes,
That's all our community, and it's a community of love.
Yes, I'm just like everything about your storytelling and just like your eagerness to like preserve history. You've definitely done it in the book, but you're also bringing it in another space. So if folks read it, they can like remember to, you know, talk to their elders and find ways to kind of like preserve their own personal history, right? It's not just about reading a book, at least that's what I want for a well-read Black girl. It's like I wanted to ignite something in you, for you to read something, and I want to say, like, let me go visit my library, or let me talk to, like, my Mima, and, like, and write everything down, you know? Just, like, have these sparks of inspiration. I do want to ask you one more question around the word community, and especially in the context of New Jessup and this like beautiful town that you created, but also the writing community, because you have so many incredible people that are supporting you. You mentioned Robert, you mentioned Disha, like they're definitely pillars of the writing community. How has becoming a writer and become, how would you say, a recovering lawyer, attorney, like how has that transition been for you, and how do you like think of community now as you like start this new part of your life?
You know, I always tell Robert, and Jason Mott is also my mentor, and so, well, like Jason is great for sending dad jokes. Like these are people who 3-4 years ago I would be like in awe of talking to them, and then now I'm like, Jason, your dad jokes are terrible. But I always tell them, and Disha, and like the people who have really embraced me, like the Bookstagram community, it's like stepping off the bus for that first time and seeing all the beautiful melanin people just coming out and supporting has been so beautiful. And it's, you know, because when I started this book, you know, I was writing this book, I was working really in a really demanding, thankless job. And where's Rada? Rada, you know. And so I would wake up. I started waking up at 5 o'clock, and I didn't have enough time. So then I would wake up at 4 o'clock, and I didn't have enough time. So I started waking up at 3 o'clock, and then I couldn't think straight. So then I said, 4 o'clock is my hour. I wrote from 4 till about 7:30, and then after work, I would shut off and write. And I didn't have a writing community. It was me. Like I was sending my manuscript to my friends to read, but I didn't have an agent. I didn't have an MFA. I didn't have the things I have come to learn, like signify literary seriousness. I had none of it. You know, I just had a story that Alice was whispering in my ear. And so slowly over time, you know, I won the Penn Bellwether, and I said, And Barbara Kingsolver said, welcome to the club. And I was like, oh, I guess I'm a novelist now.
Yes,
And,
yes, you are.
I mean, but again, I had none of the sort of credentials. I just sort of submitted on a whim. So then I started reaching out to like Maurice Carlos Ruffin, to Disha, to Robert, to Jason, and they all just took me in. And then you all really started to embrace me, and it was like a homecoming. And so it's just such a warm feeling. I continue to make new friends, and people continue to like read and show support, and I just, I feel loved. I feel loved on, and that's just a great place to be.
Well, I always tell people, they're like, what? When people ask me for advice, I'm just like, write a good story. Because if you're writing a good story, when people read it, they'll be taken by it, and then you can like build genuine friendships and grow and go to residencies and meet people and do Bookstagram, but focus on the story, because that is like the foundation of everything.
Yeah, and I have so many people ask me, because I wrote my book in 2 months, and then I edited it over. I found out about the Bellwether Prize, and then I
here, people.
No,
there's a gasp in the audience.
Wait a minute. Wait a minute. Before y'all have some sort of attack out here. These stories have been told to me. This idea of New Jessup, I came up with the mama who filled me with New Jessup from probably the womb. So by the time I had written more work and I had put that other book in a drawer, I had become the writer who could write this story. So even though it was 2 months, and then I revised it over the course of another month, because I had like a month to submit for the Bellwether. But then the actual book took like another 2 years to like revise and stuff. But I say all that to say, I get this question a lot about how do you find commercial success and what's like the magic bullet. If y'all find it, let me know.
Me too.
Because
really not one.
I wrote a story to make my family proud. I wanted to represent the Alabama where we fished in the Tombigbee and tilled the soil, and we fight for. My thing is, my people always say, don't call Alabama as the bad place. If you're going to call something out, don't call out the soil where we grew our food and hunted. Call out the sins in the hearts of man. Recognize that and fight that.
Wow.
But don't be calling Alabama, because my people still live in Alabama and love Alabama. People still live in Florida and Georgia. And I know everybody want to be mad at Florida right now. You all know who to get mad at, the boogeyman. But that's not Florida.
Right.
That's the boogeyman.
Right.
But I say all that to say it's really been a beautiful thing to be embraced by this community for a story that to me is about a Black woman who is the moonrise for like the movement, but she's not out front. And a Black woman in Alabama at that? Come on, y'all. Like, thank you. Thank you. And I can't say that enough. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for recognizing Alice for being as special as she is.
Don't have us out here crying. We trying to keep it together.
I'm trying to keep it together.
Keep the
Don't get me going.
Keep the mascara on. This might be a good moment for questions. Yes, we do. So Chanel's going to come around with the microphone. We'll start with you in the front, and then we'll go right behind.
Thank you so much. I saw a lot of DC in New Jessup in the solidarity, the pride in owning our own, and just not checking for anybody else. Like, we're not thinking about you because we got our own thing, even though we are aware of the larger social political dynamics at play. But I want to talk about patience.
I was waiting.
Rosie. Because one, I feel like there is a sequel, if not a third,
Yes.
that takes us to Chicago
Oh, yes.
to find out what happened with Rosie, because people want to know. And then also, if you could just dig into Patience, because she was a little ratchet, but she was so fun.
She was fun, honey.
She was chaos and all these things. So if you could talk a little bit about how you constructed Patience, and if you would be thinking about continuing and digging into those other storylines in successive books.
Sure. So Patience was so many of the women who were really trying to be on the front lines, who were really fighting to have a voice. And I really see Patience as when Alice came to town, you know, when they had their little thing in D.C., and Alice says, I betrayed Patience the second I got off that bus. You know, I've had people say, well, was Patience, did she have a thing for Raymond? And that's really not it. It's really that the fellas were hers since they were all on the playground. And then she's trying to, you know, be taken seriously, and they're all saying, why don't you learn from Alice where your place is? Right? And so that to her, you know, she's like, I need to have a voice, which is why she goes the direction she does. I can absolutely understand that. And she's so talented as a writer and as a, you know, as somebody who has ideas. But yeah, she loved New Jessup. And I think the one thing that if people take away nothing else, it's that everybody in this book loved New Jessup. They just loved it in their own way. As far as Rosie, I will say that I am working on a new project. And it is a story collection set in Alabama, which would surprise nobody. And the novella in the collection is called Rosie.
Oh, that's beautiful. That's beautiful.
Thank you. Well, first of all, congratulations to you for having the courage to walk away from a safe and I'm sure pretty well-paying job to
Thank you.
from a lawyer to an artist. I know one other person who's done that, and he's a baker, walked away from a job as a lawyer to be a baker. And so my question is about anger and about how you express anger in different ways versus the what are you doing with my mom's apron on anger, and then there's the patience anger near the end of the book, and what inspired you to develop anger in the way that you did. Thank you.
That's a brilliant question.
That's a great
Yeah,
question. That's
a
the
great
first time I've gotten that question.
it's
So, you know, with Percy, with his mama's apron, Percy was, you know, Raymond and Percy were like a year apart, basically. And he had always been falling behind Raymond. So he says, you got me into this. You got me thinking about civil rights. You know, you got me into all this stuff in Montgomery. Then you just gonna up and leave for this woman? And you got this woman sitting in my mama's chair and wearing my mama's apron? You know, that was, I think a lot with Percy was, this is the first time he's been home since his mama passed away. And for her to come out of the house the way she did, like, and the men are off, so it's not like she's a visitor. She's welcoming him and his wife back to his own home house. And I think for him, he's dealing with a lot of grief. He's dealing with a lot of confusion about what Raymond is doing. You know, I'm sure at multiple points, Raymond was probably like, yeah, New Jessup is for the birds. This is the future, when he was in Montgomery. Then goes home, gets his nose all wide open. And then the next thing you know, he's talking about marrying this woman, starting a family. So I think for Percy, that's a really intense personal. They shared a room as brothers. They lived together in college. They were always together. And so for him, I feel like that would have felt almost like a betrayal for Raymond to move back home. And for Patience, I think it was a different sort of betrayal with Alice, because she really wanted Alice to be her ally. You know, all the work and all the stuff she put in, and Alice said, every time I turn around, Patience want to talk to me about white people. And Alice is like, I'm done with it. Like, and so when Patience has the audacity to tell Alice what life is like outside in New Jessup, I think that's just like an irreparable wound, because Alice is like, you grew up in New Jessup, I did not. So how dare you try to tell me what I should and should not want? So, you know, I think that was a really tenuous relationship from the start. And so by the time they get to DC, plus Patience is suspicious of Alice for, you know, her involvement in getting her put out. So I think that's just all, it's all really like different forms of betrayal.
Yeah. She's gonna come around with the mic.
You all have some great questions.
These are excellent questions.
Yes.
Good job, book club.
Hi, I had a
Hi.
question about the way you use dialogue. So Alice, the audience don't really know what happened to Alice until Alice tells everybody. And it would have been really easy for you to be like, I'm gonna just tell the backstory. And then,
Yeah.
So when did you make the decision that the audience is never going to know anything unless Alice says it?
Yeah.
That's a great question.
Yeah, that is.
So, you know, I came up in a family of storytellers, and so, you know, even now I talk to my cousins, and we sort of tease each other. Is this family history or family lore? Like, what are we talking about? Because we never have the same version. And even if you hear the same story, the storytellers embellish, or they change, or details like pop in and out depending on what you hear. So the whole point is that this is a first-person narrative. It's her narrative from beginning to end. And so she's going to pick and choose what she's telling you. And she's going to tell you in a way that adds color, that literally adds like some characterization, that, you know, does all these things, that does all that work. But, you know, if Alice had to tell the story, if she told Moonrise Over New Jessup in 10 years, it would probably look very different.
Right.
You know, but it's just because it's a first-person narrative. You know, there are things that, for me, I love writing in first person because I think it gives you a chance to really be that person. There's a sort of like method writing to it. Like you get to experience her life in real time.
Yeah.
But what you can't do, I remember I got a note from my editor. She said, well, why don't you have Alice like go out to, you know, the forest and go out to the meeting? And I said, because Alice wouldn't do that.
Yeah.
So then there was this question about, well, then how does she know what's going on over there? Because if she's not seeing it for her own, with her own two eyes, how does she know unless somebody tells her? So, you know, that's sort of the limitation, but the beauty of that is that you get to have all these conversations. So when Raymond comes home and his light's all shining because Simeon's new in town, she's like, he act like I didn't hear about Simeon with the Tuesday ladies. I've been knowing about Simeon. Man that big and fine coming out of this new meat in New Jessup, please. We've been knowing about Simeon. But, you know, it's just the idea that he's coming home and talking to her. That's why that becomes really important.
I love your performances on social media, and because you really bring everything to life. I wonder how you choose the pieces that you perform.
All right, first of all, I have to acknowledge that this is Jeffrey Dalton, and his book was just today longlisted for the Center for Fiction First Fiction Award.
Yes, congratulations. We should have brought champagne.
I mean, it's not too late. How do I choose the pieces? So the first piece that I did was what I read for y'all. And that was just sort of like just dipping my toe in the water to see if anybody even wanted to see it. And then I had written a piece that's very different, the last one that I did, about a woman and her motorcycle. And that's just, it's just fun. You know, I'm just sort of having fun telling stories. It's important to me to pass stories along orally. As much as I want everybody to pick up a library card, please get your library cards.
Yes.
And pick up my book and pick up books in general. Our tradition is oral.
Yes.
So, you know, for me, part of that is passing along stories that maybe people would have otherwise never experienced. So I have to figure out, you know, I don't have a huge catalog of work, but, you know, I'm trying to figure out what I'm going to do next and when I have time.
One more question. Or we have two more? Okay.
Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
So, with the work that I do, when I pick up a book to read or I click Audible or Libby to listen to something, it's with the intention to escape. I work in maternal child health as a professional and also as a doula, so I just want to escape sometimes. And New Jessup provided that for me, and it also spoke directly to the work that I and so many other people do when it came to Alice expecting.
Yes.
And so often, Black women, when we find ourselves pregnant, we often feel like we are pregnant in a silo. And Dot just folded her in. Yes. Alice was like, well, how do you know what to do with a baby? And you spoke to so many different things, and you even spoke to Alice having high blood pressure and how that can influence pregnancy and how that can play a role in subsequent pregnancies. And I wanted to know, was that intentional? Because Alice just, it was really a coming of age for her in New Jessup, and that part in particular, I was just like, wow, does she mean to include that?
Danielle.
You know it's me.
I know it's you. I did not plant you in the audience. It was absolutely intentional. I mean, these conversations that we continue to need to have and should not need to have about Black maternal health care is just something that, you know, when I think about, because when I was working at the Department of Labor, one of the jobs that I had was to work on President Biden's task force for health disparities during COVID. And you would see all the different ways that medical machinery and sort of medical training was set up so that we were not acknowledged. I mean, it would be something as simple that you think like the pulse oximeter. It's not set up to read our skin the same. Or when you go into certain bathrooms and you're like, why is the soap not coming out? Or why is the dispenser not dispensing? Why is the water not coming out? Because they're not calibrated for Black skin. So it was absolutely intentional, but what I wanted to show was that because they did have Blakely Memorial Hospital. They had Black doctors and Black healthcare providers who cared about her. Now, her mistake was, seeing the same doctor as Miss Catherine, but he was a good doctor. They cared enough about her to say, no more, not until we get this under control. And they cared enough about her to make sure that she was cared for. And just the relationship, I mean, how scary is it as new mama? Her mama passed away when she's 13. And so they were sort of, like Rosie becomes sort of her mama, and then Rosie evaporates. And so then, she's coming into all this, and she has to figure all this out. And so, she's awkward with the babies at first. And she's like, how do you know what to do? Dot said, I don't. We'll figure it out together. But it's also that camaraderie that we have and that sort of sensibility that we have amongst each other that what you don't know, what I don't know, we'll figure it out together.
Yes.
Yeah.
So beautiful. And we'll have one last question, though, in the black shirt. Mm-hmm.
Thank you for everything you've had to say today and for especially the love that you have for the South. I am really curious about the conversations that you talked about having with elders and how you approach that oral history. I think one thing I'm curious about is, especially in the South, I think that there are a lot of silences that are intentional and that are maintained. You have elders that, approach these stories and then kind of walk up to a line and maybe retreat back from that. And so I'm curious how you approach these conversations and if you have thoughts or advice for us and the audience around approaching these conversations, given that tradition of silence that also exists.
That's such a great question. And what I would advise or what I would say is approach them as people who you want to get to know. Don't treat them like it's some sort of research project or experiment. I was in Birmingham, and this year marks the 60th anniversary of the bombing at 16th Street Baptist Church. And so when I was in Birmingham a few weeks ago, I gave some remarks for the summer convening for the Alabama African American Civil Rights Heritage Sites Consortium. And one of the people who's a part of the consortium, she got up during the luncheon and she said that as part of the sort of commemoration of this bombing, she wants to do like wants to have like trauma counselors and stuff come in. because she said, you know what we did the day after the bombing? Because these were friends of theirs, the girls who died. And for the young people, she said, we went to school. We went to work. Our teachers came to school and taught desks where a child was gone. And so those holes exist for a reason. And you see even now the elders get teary-eyed. They talk about coming out of a wedding at a church, and for me, a church is a sacred space. They talk about coming out of Sunday worship and having the church surrounded by Klansmen on horses. All you're doing is worshiping. All you're doing is watching somebody get married. These stories come out. But I just implore you, when you talk to the elders, talk to them like they're just people, like Pops. How did you pull Grandmama? Because they'll tell you that story, but they'll also tell you other stories. But don't go in there, and I'll tell you all this quick story, I'll let you go. In Anniston last year, when I was down in Hobson City is right next to Anniston, I was there for the Founders Day. And the man who is in charge from the federal government, who's in charge of the commemoration of the bus in Anniston, he's a white man from Pennsylvania. And he had done some demolition on this building, and the building, he had found a picture of the largest Klan invocation to ever occur in Alabama. It's something like 2,000 people, okay? I am in a group of black people. And so he's hopping around and he's saying, I want to show you all the picture. I'm in the group with a former Tuskegee Airman, the mayor of Hobson City, who's a black woman. All of us are black. And he's jumping around. We keep saying, no, 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 we don't want to see this. We don't want to see this. We understand what it looks like. And before we can walk out the door, he said, I just have to show you. After we said multiple times, no. And so he goes and he gets the picture and he gave it, bless his heart, he gave it to the airman first. And I'm going to use the language the man used because I want to do honor to this airman. He's part of the last airman, so he's in the 50s. He said, man, didn't we tell you don't nobody want to see that shit? And the white man looked so shocked. But we were like, we told you no. Respect our boundaries. But that goes equally for us. Now, at some point, maybe one of us, if we had fallen and bumped our heads, would have snuck back to go see the picture. Potentially, but I doubt it. But what I will say is, we need to learn to have conversations with people like they were human beings living life in Alabama in 1957. And the rest will come out. And if it doesn't, sometimes things have to go to the grave. Yeah. Sometimes things are way too painful, or sometimes you are not qualified as a trauma counselor. Because what you gonna say if they come out with something super traumatic? I'm sorry? You know, so sometimes we need to learn to respect those silences and get to allow people to fill in their story for us. So I'll say that and I'll get off my high horse.
We are so grateful for you. I can't help but sneak in one last question. Just
Sure.
This is the last one, I promise y'all.
I'll be brief.
I just am very curious where you draw the line between author and activist, because that also becomes, sometimes when I talk to other writers or other journalists, it's like, well, I'm just telling the story, I'm channeling it, I'm not necessarily like doing the work of being on the streets or protesting, or some people do both, some people pick and choose, but you feel, as I listen to you, as I read the book, it feels very integral to the person you are. So how does that show up for you?
I mean, for me, I had the distinct honor of being at Wordplay Festival a few weeks ago, and their theme really was something that speaks very near and dear to me. It was Tony Cade Bombar's The Job of the Writer is to make the revolution irresistible. I don't think there's a line, at least for me.
Yeah,
I
I'm
mean,
the same.
I came up in a family that very much believes that it is our job to empower Black people.
Yep.
So, I mean, I can tell you all the stuff that's going on with the book. Even today, I said, hey, y'all, I got nominated for this award. And they will tell me, okay, well, you're doing what you're supposed to be doing.
Right.
Because this isn't about you. This is about you uplifting and empowering your community. So I don't see a line. And if that works for me. Some people want to have a line, and that works for them, however they make their art. But my art is my activism.
Yes, that's beautiful. Yes. A perfect way to close.
Thank you all.
Thank you all for being here. We are deeply appreciative. We can take some photos. We can hang out for a second.
And I want to get
Oh,
a
a selfie.
photo of this
Yeah,
beautiful
go get it.
crowd.
All right, if you have your books, hold them up.
All right.
Let's just smile. All right, let's do it. I know. All the Kendall people. All right, you got it?
I think so.
All right, I'm going to stand up with you. All right.